All right, welcome everyone to our very first rebranded episode of Borderless by KSE. I'm joined by my co-host Tongi here, who's also on the board of KSE, and also my friend Arnold Hur of Gen.g, CEO of Gen.g. We're really glad to have you here, Arnold. Thanks for being here. Before we get started, I think one of the things that we are attempting to do with Borderless is really highlight the center stage of how Korea is playing a leadership role across different mediums, across different industries. And obviously, one of those core themes has been esports, really taking the world by storm. And we're really glad to have Arnold here, to give us his expert view on how this is all playing out.
My name is Arnold Hur at Gen.g. And give a quick background. I didn't come from, I don't know if there's a typical esports background, but I definitely did not come from gaming, unfortunately. I came from, originally started in finance. So when I graduated, I actually worked at Goldman Sachs. In investment banking for a couple years. Did that. Really wasn't a great fit for me for a lot of different reasons, but I moved over to do management consulting at the Boston Consulting Group. Really figured out how to run businesses or actually do the operations and really understand like how big companies operate. After that, I actually got the startup itch and then went over to do a startup of my own with a co-founder and failed very spectacularly. So I needed to get a real job after a couple years of doing that and, repair my balance sheet. So I worked over at Google, which was working on their Google travel product. So like when you type in hotels Los Angeles, a big box pops up. So I was on the team that helped launch that. And then after that, I got to startup itch again. I worked over at an e-commerce startup. I launched a few direct to consumer retail brands as well. Really got to learn a lot about branding and what it takes to build a great brand, even in an offline space. And then about 8 years ago, I've always been a big gamer. I was playing in esports tournaments, and then word got around, and I got a tap on my shoulder with somebody interested in starting an esports company, an esports team. And ever since then, it's just been really exciting to see all the growth, and one thing led to another, and here I am.
Thanks for the intro, Arnold. I always start these conversations a bit on the trajectory that's been taken by a lot of founders, right? So, we jokingly say it's a parental nightmare for Korean Americans for us to go from like big corporate, Goldman Sachs, then you do startup, and then you talk about gaming, right? I'm sure the discussion was not that smooth. So, you know, what was your own perspective? Because I do think we have some kind of deep-seated dogma probably sitting in the back of our mind. But what did you see early on that allowed you to have the perspective that esports, really was going to take a big part of how gaming changed?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is it was clear to me that there was something that the broader market was missing, which was that people like to watch people play games. That a lot of this new audience viewed competitive games as a sport. That there were going to be new ways to monetize a truly digital audience in the future. And that's one area that I think esports when they had a hype cycle, we thought things would move a lot faster. But now we're actually seeing once you go to the hype cycle and then the kind of the bust and then the survivors, there's fewer people around. So fewer people are making more decisions quickly. And so I do feel like things are moving faster now. And so I knew that for me, I've always said like it doesn't matter the exact next step. I think it matters a direction you want to go. Right. And for us, for me anyway, making this decision, it was I knew this was an industry I wanted to be a part of. I knew it was one that I felt that had a lot of potential, that I had deep interest in, and that I felt that I could have a really big impact in. And so when all these things lined up, I had to make the jump. And so far, it's just been a really exciting ride.
Yeah. And I guess during that journey, you talked about the hype and then the boom and the bust, so to speak. But there must have also been an inflection moment for you personally, like looking at the changes that were happening. Was it a big sponsor, coming in and saying, like a very retail sponsor saying, I want to represent this type of brand or sport? What was that moment for you where you were like, okay, this made it prime time?
I think, of course, sponsorships and getting a great big sponsor is always helpful. If anybody watching this wants to sponsor in the space of gaming, let me know. I'm happy to entertain that phone call. But I think the biggest turning point was really the start of our gaming academy. So we ended up launching a part-time and full-time academy around gaming. The same way that you would send your kid to learn violin or taekwondo or, whatever, what have you, parents would send their kids to our program to basically be trained, not necessarily to be a pro, because I think most parents recognize that most kids like won't become a pro no matter how hard they try, right? Just the law of averages and numbers work out that way. But they wanted to make sure that they were doing it in a setting that was organized, teaching the right values, and also making sure that it could lead, if structured the right way, to educational outcomes. Like we've had students get full ride scholarships into top 10, top 20 universities based on their gaming and of course their grades and everything else too. Um, and that's when I realized, when I looked at kind of the raw fundamentals, are there more people playing games every year? Yes. Are more people watching people play games competitively every year? Yes. And now, is there a wave of parents also wanting to treat this more like a sport, more like a true passion, and helping their kids find a career through this passion? Once that clicked in, I knew that there was a really great future, even if the hype cycle was over, that there was something there that actually really showed a potential for the future.
Awesome. We want to kind of move over now to, I guess, what the next steps might be for you, kind of growing the mission of the brand and the long game. And Tony has a couple of questions that I think are well suited to lead that discussion. So I'll hand it over to Tony to kind of transition over to that part of the conversation.
Yes. So I got a chance to take a look at a couple of your previous interviews, and I see that you talk a lot about the growth. As you just mentioned, having parents to support and nurturing these young professional gamers are very important. And so I wanted to check beyond winning trophies. What are the non-negotiables as part of the Gen Z culture that you're building? If there's one thing a player or staff member does that make you say like they're not a good fit for us. So if there's like two things that you really value as part of being the culture that you're trying to cultivate in your company, and something that you wouldn't necessarily see as a fit.
So I think, I will actually take a lesson from one of our coaches on our esports team. And he said something that seemed obvious, but was kind of deep. And I think this is something that can translate to across any organization. The people that are obviously wrong are easy to spot, right? And the people that are obviously great are easy to spot. The people that really kill a team, it's what we call, so when you're playing a game and you're playing a competitive game, one of the things that's hardest to find, unless you're looking for it, is not the one that creates all the problems, because that's up in front of you. It's the person where, let's say you and I are playing a game and I'm supposed to do something and you're supposed to, you're dependent on me to do my job, right? And let's say I don't do it, and you say, while we're all on a call on voice comms, right? And then don't address it, don't talk about it. That's actually the team killer. It's that one person where, maybe they're not doing their job, or, but whatever that team setting is, they don't allow the team to have the proper conflict to actually resolve the issue, because they just sigh, bring down everybody's mood and motivation, and basically kill the team without anything specific you can point to. So they'll stick around because nobody is going to get upset. Because let's say you were saying to me, "Hey, Arnold, why didn't you do your job? Like, I need you to do your job so I can do mine." Well, then we can have a discussion about it and we can figure out what the actual problem was. Was it me or was it something else? Let's say you sigh, even though I was at the wrong. Like, me not doing my job would be very easy to figure out. But let's say you just sigh, you go on the call and you move on. We will never know what the actual problem was. We will never fight about it, and we'll actually never get to a resolution. And it's not like I can get mad at you either. I will clock that you sighed, but I'm not going to be like, "Hey, how dare you sigh?" Right? And so that's something that I always look for. Who's the person in the room that clearly is silently silently tanking the team. And so, I think a lot of people will talk about, oh, get A players and you get only, if you hire B players, they hire C players. Yeah, sure, that's great. But if you're living in the reality of a budget constrained environment, I would say like that's the one area that I look for in terms of people that we don't want. And the people that we do want is, especially now, we look for people with maybe, especially us, like we're not open AI with an unlimited budget. We have to look for, I would say like crunchier or like edgier people. So it's really easy if you play like FIFA to say you want Ronaldo, right? Because if you look on his stat chart, everything is perfect, right? But we just simply do not have. If you find that person and they want to work for you under a normal budget, then absolutely go get that person. But I think the other thing that we look for are people that stick out in one dimension, exceptional, even if there are clear downsides to their personality on others. I think especially with so many AI tools now available, it's more interesting to find people with like an edge in their personality. And that brings something really interesting to the team rather than just more generally well-rounded, pure, well-rounded people. And we've definitely found more success under a budget constrained environment, working with those types than we have with kind of the perfect image folks.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, no, I definitely see that always having some sort of a challenge or a limit always sparks more creativity. So I think that's one good answer to how you kind of see the growth in that side generation. I wanted to also tap into your experience of like currently where you are at right now. Is there a big gap that you kind of notice right now between you or the leadership versus the young NG generation of Koreans?
So I would say we work with a very young team in general. So I would say that the gap is probably more me and them versus them and the audience, because we have a very young team in general. I think there's a lot to be said about just taking time to not be the stereotype of a millennial that says, oh, Gen Z doesn't understand. But also challenging the Gen Z idea that like, oh, the millennials don't understand. And if you think about both and from just a logical perspective, it actually ends up making sense for both, right? So one of the things that what I mean by this, and I'll probably say a good example would be like understanding that, there are certain things that you will see that you just won't understand unless you're Gen Z. So we work a lot with content and content creators. And it's really hard for them to, let's say we work with a big sponsor and they want to do content and they want them to say ABC line, right? Like, hey, I am Apple computer and the iPhone is the best and thank you and take a beautiful shot with the photo, right? And from our perspective, it's like, look, they're paying you, you should do your job. From a lot of the content creators' perspective, they're like, no, this isn't real. But they also say that, and both sides are right because the people controlling the budget, who the millennial was talking to, just wants 3 deliverables and check the box. And they worked with a big enough creator, well, they feel like it's going to do enough and it's going to be safe versus the Gen Z creator is going to want to make it their own. They want to do something that feels authentic. Otherwise, they are basically tanking their brand and they also know their audience just doesn't react positively to like very fancy professional looking things anymore. So I think in our world, if you look on our like Instagram reels, for instance, like we have a huge focus on our shorts and, we've really, really figured out and cracked the code on how do we get this engine to move so that we're producing content while still making sure that it's valuable for brands that work with us.
Right. And then when it becomes your job, it's no longer that kind of entertainment value, but like you have to be very good and you have to be very competitive. And have you seen that kind of create a like a burnout mechanism potentially, or do because of their generation and they're a bit younger, that it's harder to see this as a job, or is esports such a big category now that they've always thought about it as becoming like a job, like a baseball player or a basketball player?
Well, I think, this year, for instance, there's the Asian Games. And, one of our players, actually two of our players are actually Asian Games medal winners.
Nice.
So they won gold. And
Yeah.
so
Wow.
obviously with that comes a military exemption. So I think having those kinds of recognition has really changed, a parent's mindset about what esports can mean. The other is that now there are esports scholarships that are happening. Students are getting scholarships to go into university, um, based on their gaming backgrounds. In traditional sports, you have something called IMG Academy,
Hmm.
which is like the high school you go to if you're a promising athlete. And they basically supply 50% of the D1 universities spots for athletic teams. And the other part is, I think, as more universities recognize gaming as a passion, they've actually now, like, it matters more about how you package your gaming and structure it so that you can add it to your resume when you apply for a competitive school, especially in the United States. I know the system in Korea is different, it's more test based, but for any place that's more broad looking, they actually do take this as demonstrated interest and passion that leads to an outcome if you package it the right way. So
Hmm.
I think across the board, more parents are pushing this. And I think we meet a lot of parents that did all of the things they were supposed to. And they're a little bit disillusioned with just going to school based on pursuing something that they're not passionate about.
Mm.
And so they're much more willing to support a kid's passion around it.
Oh,
And actually, it's one of the reasons why we ended up launching in June, we'll be launching our own summer program with
mm,
Arizona State University
okay.
in LA. So we're actually going
Okay.
to be launching kind of a careers in gaming summer program where students in high school can learn about what different careers there are, have project based work, so they have things they can add to their portfolio, and really give them a taste about like, hey, this is how you would build a career in gaming.
Right, 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 right. And that ties to kind of our next topic that we want to cover off, which is a little bit more brass tacks, but the profitability or the potential of esports, right? Both as an industry, as a team, as a company, as well as individual players, like we just talked about. And there are times that I think you've said that it's potentially more profitable to lose than to win because of the costs, and so there's probably some type of balancing, right, of a tightrope that needs to occur both in terms of content management, in terms of visibility, in terms of parents, taking this very seriously for the next generation of players and athletes that you can bring in. So, what do you think are the variables or the balls that you're juggling when you're dealing with such a high performance sport and team when it's not that clear that the smartest business move is like just always to try to be the best, I guess.
And that's just part of being in sports, right? That's like looking at every sports team and saying, "Oh, this team is stupid. Why don't they just get all the best players at the biggest budget?" Right? Like, so that one I accept, right? Like, it's more about how do you develop a system working with a publisher so that it encourages teams to build a sustainable winning model. Right. And I think that one is one that every sports league struggles with. Like most recently in the NBA, you had a lot of rumors about how do you get teams to stop tanking? Because it's not really
Right,
fun for an audience member to watch their favorite NBA team tank for the draft from the middle of the season,
right,
right?
right,
And so, I think that's an area that's going to require a lot. And at the same time, it's like, how do you make sure that teams don't come in and just spend through the roof and then just leave as soon as it doesn't work out, right?
right,
And
right.
so I think all of those things are areas that require a lot of work. But I don't know. I don't really like to, or rather, I stopped complaining about it because it's like, well, it's part of the job, right? Like, it's like you
Right.
go to the gym and you complain the weights are heavy. It's like, no, that's part of the job.
Yeah, 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 exactly. But do you think that, I guess, at some point right now the esports league, I guess, like is as or maybe a little less important than the individual teams themselves, right? But if you look at, I guess, potentially other sports, the league does a lot of that lifting at the same time for on
Hmm.
behalf of the teams, right? And so the teams can focus on management and performance versus a visibility of the entire sport in and of itself. Do you see that kind of happening in esports as well?
Yeah, I think teams are going to matter a lot more because one of the biggest advantages is that there's basically different, how do you call this? There are different teams and different games that you can participate in, right? So I think that's one area where what teams are going to be the true partners for a publisher I think it's going
Yeah.
to matter most, right? And I think that is a question that I think we need to really figure out, which is my view is that kind of there's maybe 40 esports teams that really matter at this moment in time in the world across every country, across every region. And by the next 2 or 3 years, there's only going to be 20. And so in that world, and if you're part of the top 10, I think it's going to be tremendously more valuable to be part of the top 4 teams in the world rather than the top 14th team in the world. Just the way all those curves always work. And so if you are in that, let's say, top 10, top 20, you become a team that publishers want to work with. So every new game that there's going to be a competitive scene in, they're going to want to work with a verified team, with a team with a fan base, and I do think that is going to really support the future of where esports goes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I do believe that as more competition comes, and that's something that, with all of these tools that are now available for publishers or individuals or studios to use, it's becoming incrementally easier and easier every day to make a game. So that
Yeah.
means there's
Right.
going to be more competition. But
Right.
in terms of the team side, I think there's going to be less competition and there's going to be fewer and fewer teams.
Right.
And
Right.
so I think that dynamic is one that, we really want to focus in on.
Yeah. Yeah. But that actually is kind of interesting because other moats, I guess, need to be created now because, like you said, it's easier and easier now to build a physical game, and some of them are going to be even more advanced than anything that we've ever seen. Like, it's not like the NBA, its moat is not basketball, right? I mean, it is basketball, but inevitably it's the brand, it's the fandom and things like that. But esports is kind of unique in that it has a lot of the origin story in Korea as well, right? And the top teams, including Gen.g, are Korean teams. And are you seeing a lot of those tailwinds kind of come to fruition where the K brand is elevating that like holistically, right? Like rising tides? Or are people still kind of viewing esports as an independent category from KIP or Korean content in general?
I think if I look at where a lot of the growth is, and a lot of it is driven by kind of APAC, I think Korea is playing a leading role in kind of the content wave. I would say most experts or industry people, not experts, industry people still haven't really recognized esports stars as a part of this wave. But I would actually argue that that's happening even on the sports side, right? Like, yes, everybody knows Sunny, but
Yeah.
Koreans know Sunny.
Yeah.
But a
Yeah.
lot of international fans, well, maybe this is more in the US because, the US, still calls
Football,
it
yeah, soccer, yeah.
soccer, like they have other issues, but they don't really know who Sonny is, right? I know everything about this guy, right?
Yeah.
Like, but like they seriously don't, he's on every billboard in Korea. But I think now is kind of this next
Mm,
wave that I think even Korean sports stars will get that international recognition that they deserve,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's going to happen. And I think Sunny is probably the first iteration of, not the first, but a sign that it is happening right now, right? Because he's
Yeah.
all over here in LA and not just in Koreatown. Like he is the next big star in LA. And I think the more that they recognize it's not just movies and music, but it's culture. I think that's when people will really recognize that, oh, what's also driving culture in Korea.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
gaming is one of the big ones.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is like the recognition of both the K brand as well as I think a deep-seated maybe understanding that they are doing things better. And so, like from an external perspective, right? Which is why we should partner up with them in terms of IP and K entertainment or even, esports and gaming. So I think you're absolutely right that it's still in the process of spilling over, of identifying, Sunny as a K athlete, for example, versus just as a football player is a big part. And baseball is playing a leadership role in that. A lot
Yeah.
more baseball players are coming over, being traded very actively. So I think that's going to be pretty exciting. And hopefully, we're going to see the same thing for esports. Another part that we do want to talk about, maybe for the audience that's like kind of less versed in this space, is that fundamentally, I think the business model is really different than traditional sports, right? Like for esports, it's not not necessarily like tickets at the stadium like all the time, but there is a emerging of minds when it comes to IP and content creation fundamentally. Is Gen G's future, or like if you look out, you're retired also and you're looking back at Gen G and you're looking at esports, is this a generational lifestyle thing? Can esports become that, right? Like, my friends who are unfortunately lifetime Jets fans, for
Yeah.
example, right? Their grandfather was buying seasons tickets, and finally my generation stopped buying it because they were so bad, and it felt like they were just like paying to keep them alive. And so, do you see things like that where it's not necessarily only about the performance, but it's such a deep-seated identity, right? And in this case, it's not geographically related, so it's going to be more digitally related. So I think that has some challenges, but I'd love to hear your perspective on where you see esports in 10, 20 years.
I think basically, I think esports teams are going to be I think every competitive game with an esport is going to have a handful of teams that support the scene right from the start. As it gets more and more competitive to launch a successful game, they're going to need to find and make sure that, the biggest problem right now is a game launches and no matter how good the game is, if you lose kind of a hardcore base that continues to find enjoyment in playing the same game and getting better at it and watching the game being played by experts, you become one of these like games that has a huge jump and just kind of drops off. Right. Versus, I think with esports and having a proper esports scene in it, it makes sure that a game that does really well, if it's fun to watch, and that's a big qualifier, that it can continue to live on beyond the normal game's hype and bust cycle, right? And when you're making that kind of bet, you don't want to make that bet with teams you've never heard of, right? You want to make that bet with teams that are going to come in, take care of the players, make sure that they're doing the marketing deliverables and, all of these things that are required. And so I see a future where, esports teams are part of every game launch, right? That is thinking about a competitive scene. Not right now, which is a game launches, they see if it does well, and then they start esports, right? The other part that I see is I actually see parents realizing that this sounds crazy coming from a esports guy, but parents letting their kids just play games by themselves is actually one of the most harmful things that a parent could do. And I say this because we work with publishers, and what you're basically letting them do is saying, let us put your kid in a content loop, content and dopamine loop. And then we're going to optimize around them playing the game more and then buying things in the game. That is the only thing they're optimizing for. They're not optimizing for better teamwork. They're not optimizing them for academic outcomes, work life balance, none of that. They're optimizing them for time spent, things bought in the game. Right. And so I think there's going to be a wave of parents that recognize, you know what? It's really important. And we've actually done a commissioned, even a study with Yonsei University, one of the top universities in Korea. Even kids in any kind of setting where they're playing an online game, but they're next to other kids in huge jumps in less anxiety, happiness, less loneliness, which is actually a key problem, especially for young men right now. And so all of these things need a home. So we even started our own PC cafe. Besides school, we launched a big PC cafe right in front of Dongdaemun Plaza.
Mm.
And then, so, one of the things that I think we've really set up there is like even the game like terminals that you have at a normal PC cafe, we made it so you can like lift up the dividers so you can like come with your friends, right? Like we've seen it. Like it's such a big difference. We have a kid that had a 1.9 GPA, but he was like like top 1% in League of Legends. So clearly he's a genius when it comes to this thing, right? I've seen him play and I'm like, this kid's a genius. At the same time, he has a 1.9 GPA. So this didn't match, right? And then he came into our program, graduated with a 4.0.
Wow.
And I wrote him a recommendation letter to Berkeley recently.
Wow.
And like you just recognize that especially the education system in Korea has still not, it doesn't work for everybody. And there's this huge swath of really intelligent kids that like just need a different way to learn. So if I envision the future, I think our view is that play is potential, that there's going to be a way that you're going to be able to extract a kid's play and link that and correlate that and causate that to actually their potential, not just in the game, but in the
Mhm.
workforce or in other academic settings. So I think that's actually going to be the future where we actually don't view gaming as just a waste of time, a content pit that you just buy skins, but you start
Mhm.
measuring the right things and you start measuring that they can have different outcomes and their potential for these outcomes are a lot of it can be measured by gaming.
Sorry, I'm gonna pass it on to Tongi for our next segment, but right before I pass it on, just to I guess pull that thread a little bit, are you seeing that people watch esports as a game even if they don't necessarily engage in that sport itself? Right? Like, are you seeing that more people are watching esports even if they don't play the game, or is it still heavily tied to the game launch and its brand? The reason I ask is because some of the biggest, brands in the world or sporting brands in the world, like F1, you don't race, right? It is very exciting to watch, but you don't race. People watch golf, but necessarily they don't want to become a professional golfer or very that good. What are you seeing like in the evolution of esports, which is a lot of digital consumption, right?
I think in terms of how people are consuming content, we actually see this firsthand in the
Hmm.
way even our kid that, I was telling you about the 1.9 GPA kid, he could not handle sitting in class, being taught something, he understands it. He just can't handle sitting there when he understands something and yes, just keep needing to, do some, like it was a waste of time for him. And then we look over his shoulder. Do you know he watches like his lessons at like 3.5x speed. Like it's insane, right? Like not 3.0 speed. Like if they're a slow talker, he'll watch it, but I can't watch something at 3.0 speed. Nothing. Everybody sounds like Eminem, rapping. And so I think that's a clear realization that something needs to change. Kids don't consume content the way that teachers taught content, right? And we notice it, to be honest, even I notice it. I can't watch long form YouTube without like speeding it up. I just can't do it, and even Netflix, I don't know the last Netflix movie I watched where wasn't on my phone. So I think there is a seismic shift, good and bad, and I think the winners that figure out how to create content across any dimension, whether it's educational, gaming, what have you, that kind of scratches that itch a little bit better and makes that content better. I think how you deliver the content matters quite a bit more so than just what the content says and whether you've like done it. And I think that's a really important piece that I think is going to revolutionize at least the education space.
Awesome. Tongi?
Yes. So for this next segment, I want to welcome you into our interview room. So this is going to be our final segment, specifically designed for aspiring founders or CEOs. We want to give our KSE audience a little bit of real insight by asking a few key business business questions. So you could answer them with all the knowledge or experience that you've gained so far up till today. So given the rapid evolution of AI, what are you currently integrating into your personal day-to-day work or on a company-wide level at Gen.g?
Oh, this is a great question. So we are, I guess, doing it I would say there's personal, company, and people, right? So on a company front, and that's kind of a more easier one to recognize is we're actually actively building because we have so much data around how to do game coaching because we do it for our thousands of students and we have the most voice recordings and the most data on it. We know how to coach at least students better than any other. And so we actually are building kind of our own kind of AI game coaching tools. And then that's kind of the way that we recognize that, hey, we need to understand where this industry is going and we need to make our bets in it as well. The other areas I think would be more on, let's say, personal. So I've kind of viewed it as I now have access to the best executive coaches in the world across all expertise and dimensions, right? So I try actively to at least keep up with the new tools, whether it's the content creation stuff whether it's programming, whether it's, vibe coding, all that stuff, just so that I'm aware of where things are and how quickly things move, especially given that so much of our business is around content and that's an engine. And this one is one where I want to understand, but I also want to be careful because I don't think the audience wants AI content right now. At the same time, AI content is blowing up and all the numbers and metrics say that it's dominating. So, if we think about the end game, verifiably true content is going to be worth a lot because you're going to be flooded with AI content everywhere else, right? In a world where everything is perfect, maybe the clearly real things matter a lot more. So that's an area we've been careful of, but I've been working on trying to understand what the tools are. And then, even small things like self-improvement. I guess we didn't record this podcast in terms of a transcription, but every meeting I have it transcribed. And then I upload it into Claude. And then I ask Claude, hey, how did I do in these meetings? Right? Tell me about what like reminders I should have going into next week to follow up on, help me prep for the meeting, or give me feedback on areas that I could improve on the meeting. Like, how have I really been a better leader this year than last year? Or this week than last week, right? And so that incremental change, I think, can really happen. And then finally, I think even small things like I like journal every morning and kind of I upload all of these and have it really ready in like ChatGPT and in these tools. So just so that like I can actually kind of reflect on like progress over time and like patterns that emerge. So one thing that like recently emerged was like, hey, I was going to try to be more mindful and be more present because like there's a lot of stuff happening, there's a lot of great stuff happening. Like let's take a moment to like remember the great stuff that's happening too, right? And it's just nice having like the additional reminder saying like, hey, there's a pattern emerging here, you're seeing the same thing, and today you said you did this, or yesterday you did this, and that kind of points to it, right? I also have recognized like ChatGPT is very self-affirming, so that's probably why I use that one for that one versus Claude, which is really good at criticism. So yeah, I use different tools for different projects.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'm also jumping into Claude this week, into just diving in a little bit, personalizing a little bit. So I will definitely take that into my to-do list to add, personal feedback machine.
Yeah, I think segmenting them in the right folders helps a lot.
Mm.
And then starting to develop agents that start pushing things and reminders to you instead of you doing like a pull, right? By pushing your content and then, pulling what the response is really kind of takes it to the next level. And so for me, kind of getting, a little bit more feedback on figuring out how that's going to help. I think that's going to be really important.
Yep, yep. I think you kind of did talk a little bit about how you're also using this for your personal, development. But outside of AI, then, is there any specific skill, like hard or soft, that you're still actively trying to get better on or improve on?
I would say prioritization is probably the most important things. Like now, with all of these tools at the ready, I think there's a tendency to be attracted by the new shiny thing across every single one of these tools. And they're really fun to mess around with because you feel like you get like new powers that you didn't otherwise have. And so you start wanting to do a little bit of everything. And so having a consistent focus on something that I really want to get better at, I think that's something that I got to do a better job of. And that's something that I've been trying to use some of these tools to help me refocus on is how do I really focus in on, let's say, a really critical piece for me. And I think one that we're really good at is content, right? Short form content, creating content, getting attention, and driving that attention to kind of commercial endeavors in our company, right? So, time spent there is probably more valuable than me working on creating new music songs that like, using the AI tools because I just think it's really fun, right? I mean, they probably
I know you
intersect
want to be
and
K-pop star.
they probably intersect. It's because I can't sing or have any musical talent that like
Yeah.
I'm also learning how to play guitar though. So
Oh, there you
that
go.
way I feel like I'm not betraying music because I like learn real music, but then also learn the other side. So yeah, I think a little bit more focus so that I can like really go further and deeper with these tools, I think is something that I gotta really focus on.
Awesome, awesome. That concludes this segment of Interview Room, but I think all the points that you just touched based on will be helping me and probably a lot of the aspiring founders and people who are looking to improve themselves, whether that's career or just in daily life. So, yeah, those are really good points. Thank you for sharing them.
Of course.
So Arnold, before we I guess kind of wrap up the whole session, do you have any last words that you'd like to give for an aspiring generation that's looking to esports, as something of entry, and how best to prepare and break into the space?
Yeah, I think preparing for working in esports, and I would say first, don't target something so small. Like esports is still a tiny industry. Target something much broader. That way you have a higher chance of hitting the target, right? And so I think the broader gaming industry is a much bigger target, one that's still growing every year. So targeting that is going to infinitely increase your chances of success. The second piece I would say is even if you're approaching a bigger target, how do you have the biggest chance to hit that target? Is actually show experience in that industry earlier than other people would, right? And so it can mean having a portfolio. It can mean vibe coding a bunch of different games. It can mean having a content portfolio of CapCut edits that you've done if you want a marketing job in content, right? Like these are the things that you need to pick up early, and you should be ready to interview when you graduate high school, not college. By the end of college, you should have already worked at least some internships or some projects that make you have a same portfolio that the other graduate who just went to class and got A's did, right? And also, don't use this as an excuse not to get A's. I feel like with a lot of these new tools around, you can so easily, you have an assistant buddy that's a genius, right? So, if you can do those things in this very competitive market, graduate with a portfolio one way or another, that's going to be infinitely more valuable, right? Especially for you to hit a bigger target in gaming.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate your time, Arnold. I think that's a wrap. Thank you to my co-host, Tongi. This has been the first episode of the rebranded Borderless by KSE. Remember to share and support Korean startups and entrepreneurs. It's a wrap. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.